everybody, so the time has finally come to learn how to size and string. Huzzah! And bonus, we're going to do it on a Harpy wing set. So twofer, you're going to learn how to do both. The principle for sizing and stringing is exactly the same for a Harpy wing set as it is for any other set. The only difference being that we're just sizing to a line that's going to be the elastic strap that we're going to clip these to, versus you sizing to the hole in the frame that you're going to, but it's still the same exact principle. So that's what we're going to do today. So the first thing I always do, I just kind of do a last check on my sketch and make sure everything kind of lines up, that I have enough space on my feathers, that everything, like at least on the bottom edge, obviously the top edge is too long, but on the bottom edge looks good. I have enough feathers for, at least for the Harpy wing, I make sure that I have enough feathers to fit the person's arm. If it is a static set, what you're looking for when you lay these out is that you don't have any feathers that are like too skinny, and that when you lay them out along your pattern, and I'm not necessarily matching perfectly up with your pattern per feather, but at least this line, making sure that if you give it proper spacing when open, that you don't have, they're not so skinny that you're not filling up that space properly, because you definitely want to make sure that everything is overlapping at least a little bit when it gets, you know, towards the top, so that everything slides over one another once you're, you know, opening and closing your wings if they're mechanical, or in this case that, you know, if they're not, like, you don't want them spaced out like this so that, you know, they're floating free. They need to be overlapping so that they move against one another when you're folding in and out. So the first thing we're going to do, now that I've made sure all of my feathers are the right size and that I have enough of them, is I'm going to go ahead and restack them in order so that I don't mess this up. We are going to start feather number 1. So, so on a Harpy wing set, you're going to have a wristband, and on that wristband is going to be this little bar that holds, kind of like a fan, your feathers, and that's going to be pretty much at your wrist joint. When you hold the feather, it'll pull a little farther forward maybe, but for the most part I like to size it to the wrist, because if you go too small, it's a problem. If you go too big, you can clip down. You know, if you leave an inch or two at the end of your wire, you have a couple of inches to trim it down if you really need to. But bigger is always better, right? Not always, but in this case. So right now I have this marked to here. I'm going to go ahead, for my own personal use, I'm going to make a little mark exactly where it falls on the bar. That's not exactly where you're going to make your loop, but it's close. So I'm going to do that for every single feather that I have. Let's make this little mark where it falls on the pivot point in this case. Third feather. Now you're going to get to the point where this overlaps the feather. Makes things a little annoying. You can use a pencil if you really don't want to mark up your feather with something dark like this pink. I'm going to go ahead and still use a permanent marker. A, it's what I got. B, I know I'm going to be cutting it off and covering it, so I'm not too worried about it. But if you are, you can use a pencil on white feathers or something that you can wipe off, like a grease pen or something. And I'm just gonna mark on the feather itself. Okay, so these first ones are going around this pivot point that we're basically going to be creating a fan that we're opening and closing at the wrist. The rest of these feathers are going to be using alligator clips that clip to, you can use a nice stiff elastic, or you can use like a nylon strap if you really want to. I like to use a slightly tightened elastic strap because it has some give and some bend to it, which not only helps your feathers stay taut, but it helps to not create like gross buckling along the back of the arm when you straighten your arm out, because you would have to have it loose to be able to bend your arm, and then when you straighten your arm again, you're going to have these buckles and, you know, things are going to droop. So I use elastic. You can also create like a wrapping system or a sleeve system that keeps them a little tighter to the arm. For example, you can put a piece of nylon, sew it along a glove, like an actual glove, and clip it to that so that the glove holds the wing on and keeps everything from buckling. And that actually works really, really well, especially if you're doing a cosplay where it's a very sleek upper arm. And then you just need to put a line of fuzz along the back to kind of cover up your clips, and then that's it, you're good to go. So on this one, what we're doing is she has an open arm and she's having these gold wraps around her arm to hold this elastic band on, and we're doing elastic because we really want to try and have a smooth line along the back of the arm when she... Okay, so those alligator clips look like this. And they're electrical alligator clips, and they're actually pretty stiff, which is good. We want to have... you don't want to use hair clips or anything like that because they're not going to have the grip strength to hold these up, especially under tension. These electrical clips, like, they're not super hard to open, but I mean, you need some force to open and close these bad boys. And they've got a really nice little alligator jaw that allows them to really kind of jag their way into and really grip that elastic or that nylon. So these are nice, but you have to take into consideration that this is adding about 2 inches of length, maybe 1.5 inches once you get the clip on to the elastic of length. So really, and you want it to go all the way through here and up past into this place, so you probably can account for an extra inch maybe of the, so this needs to be 1 inch shorter from where you measure to account for the alligator clip. If you measure all the way up to your line, these are going to end up dropping lower than you want them to. So just keep that in mind. If you're making a articulating set, you don't really need to worry about that. Just measure on your framework, mark out where your holes are, or have your frame out there. Put this on your pattern and measure up to that hole, and then mark where the hole is, and just do that the whole way up, whole way down. If you're making Harpy sets, got to think about these guys. So what we're going to do, this next feather, it's going to go right about here. And I am going to mark just about 1 inch below my line. And you can, if you want, kind of draw a 1 inch line underneath, if that, helps you, and you go to the second line instead. But up to you, whatever helps. You do you, boo. A couple of those might be a little long, but we're going to double check before we clip. So the first thing you're going to do before you start clipping wires is actually clipping off any excess fabric. So this one, our mark is all the way up here, so that's actually a really good spot, especially for the top feather on a Harpy wing set. We want this to be so basically this is going to be at the wrist. We want to be able to grab this feather without it buckling like that. So actually what I do is I tend to bring this feather out and down so that you can grip right at the top of this feather, and that's how you open and close. You can also create, like if you have a glove, you can sew this feather to the glove, or you can glue on a wrap. We might do that. but having a little bit of extra space isn't too big a deal at the base because you need to be able to have that, the ability to grab this top feather just in case. So I'm going to leave that intact, and I'm going to create a loop there, but that gives me plenty of space so I don't need to clip anything off there, and I think this one's right at that spot, so good on that one. But then we start to get to this problem where our mark is on the inside of our previously made feather. So what we're going to do is kind of creating this same arc, clip to that spot at least. You want to give yourself a little bit of space, like especially if you're going to be covering this, giving yourself just a little bit of space to create that loop isn't a bad idea. I am trying, because she doesn't have any fuzzies covering this, I want to make it as nice as possible and like a real feather as possible. I definitely need to at least get to that mark, which I've just barely done. And what I'm going to do on this, because it is going to be pretty raw, like you're going to see the whole thing, is I am going to make a couple little jaggedy bits so that it looks kind of like the top of a feather, and we're going to round this out. Kind of give it a little bit of that. If you're going to be able to see the top of a feather, making sure that you polish it off is always a good idea. You can round these, you can make them a little more slanted, but giving them a little fake fuzz at the top is not a bad idea. And then we're going to do that for every single one of these feathers. Just going to clip along in case you can't see what I'm doing. I'm clipping along the very edge of my wire on either side. Go straight across this time to get to that point, and then what I'm doing is I am peeling off the fabric and glue here on either side of the wire, and then I'm clipping that off. So that you have, and then if there's any residual glue, you kind of got to pick at it. Hopefully it comes off with the fabric, and usually it does, but apparently not today. Dang it. But once you peel that off and clip everything off, you're good to shape. You can shape them later. I'm going to shape them now. And then you should be good. I'm actually going to bring this down a little farther. You want to, so I have it, like I clipped it to the point that I need to create the loop. You want to go a little bit lower, just a little bit, like a centimeter. Especially if this is the first time you're doing it, giving yourself a little space isn't a bad idea. Especially if you are making an articulating set and you don't need it to be this meticulous, because you're not going to be able to see the top of the feather anyway. You can give yourself a good inch or two of space. It's not a big deal. Nobody's going to see it. In this case, because you are going to see it, I'm just trying to be a little more fancy schmancy, and make sure that I keep it as close to the top as possible. is relatively perfected and the size that I want and everything. The next thing that we're going to do is you're going to size your second set of feathers based on this set in terms of the clipping, and then we're also going to do it again once we do the once we make our loops and everything. We're going to double check that our loops are the same on these, because you want these to be the same exact size as this side. If you're making your framework right, your framework should be identical on both sides. You shouldn't have one wing that's larger than the other or anything. And the spacing between your holes, you should try and match up so that both sides are the same. And then what that means is that this side should be exactly the same size as this side. And what that helps you do, rather than like flipping this over and doing what I just did here again on the other side, by just matching these feathers to this, these ones here, what you're doing is making sure that both sides are identical. And if you try and match on the other side with this pattern, you're going to get more variation just because the framework is moving, or maybe your judgment is just a little bit off here and there, and it's not going to be a big difference, but it's going to be, it might be enough for people to be able to notice and see that the two sides are not the same. So the next thing we're going to do, and I'm going to do this off camera because you have better things to do in your life, is match this side to this side. So the next step is going to be to create the loops that we need for the fan part of this whole apparatus. This is the technique you're going to use if you are making a set of articulating wings as well. All of your pegs, all of your feathers are going to have a loop at the top, just like this, that's going to connect and bolt to the frame, and that's how you're going to have your pivot. So we're going to do this for the first 8 feathers on the Harpy wing set. This may change depending on your look. If, for example, what's her name? It's a monster girl that's a little blue harpy, and she has super duper thin feathers in comparison to what I'm doing right now. So for that you might need 10 or 12 feathers for the fan part of the wing. Hers also, I think, fan backwards about here too. So you may end up doing quite a few more total feathers in the fan, but for my normal Harpy sets, usually it's about 8 feathers look good coming down. So I've already measured and double checked these and made sure that they're, at least for this part, in the right spot, and either they're marked or the loop needs to be at the very top of the feather. So what you do, and you can do this with any board. I have this pegboard that I'm using, but you can use a 2x4 with a 1/4 inch hole drilled into it, or any piece of scrap wood that you have. You just want to make sure that it's long so that you can hold onto the board and stabilize the board if you need to. But other than that, any scrap piece of wood really is going to work. And what you're going to do is, through that hole that you drill, you're going to put a 1/4 inch bolt, and that's going to serve as a pivot point that we can forcibly loop our wire around. And for the 9 gauge, this part can be really difficult, but it's much easier to do it this way than to try and do it just with a pair of pliers or something. Don't try that, trust me. I used to do it that way, and it was a giant pain in the rear. So I've created a loop, and then I'm going to clip and hammer this down so that it's flat. So you'll notice that this loop does that. The less you get this, the better. So like when you're doing this, pressing down, I didn't have a lot to work with, which makes it a little more difficult. But you basically want to make sure that your loops aren't too twisted, and that's probably what's going to end up happening here. Oh, maybe not. Not too bad. But you'll notice that it's kind of at an angle. You want to avoid that, and so what I'm going to end up having to do is kind of work with this to fix that. So getting it flat, if you didn't get it flat originally, is really, really hard. So definitely try and press down on, and the more wire you have to work with while you do this, the easier it is. And that's why I'm straightening this out and trying to give myself a little more leverage. Once you get to the 12 gauge, this is super easy. So, but these first ones are kind of a pain in the rear. That's better. Rather than leaving them to the side, I'm gonna do that. Again, if you have, you're doing this on an articulating framework rather than the Harpy wing, I would give this a little more space. You're going to be covering this with a sleeve, the very top, and you don't want anything like this gunking up your framework or your pivot point. In this case, again, it's kind of unique in that this is going to be visible all the way to the top. So we're kind of set these aside for now, since we know that that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and start putting these clips onto these feathers. And so what I do is I want to give each feather just a tiny bit of space to come up in here, and then I try and give just a teeny tiny hook at the end, not a full hook, but just a little little arc to the side so that it hooks on the edge of this and isn't coming straight up through, so that it'll pull straight back out if there's enough force. You want to give it a little something to hook onto. But double checking this. Out here. So yeah, that looks good because the alligator clip is going to go over this line, and then we want the bottom of this basically at the base of your feather, where you cut everything off, or you can even, if you need to, kind of cut a little bit of a slit on either side and have this go a little bit over. And yeah, but this looks good, so I'm going to clip this off. I'm going to clip it off just on the inside of here so that it comes up all the way through and then kind of arcs out. I have my so I'll just clip it. Just a little bit of something at the top. And then going to take our tub of Power Grab, or you can use other glues. This one is ever so slightly flexible and bonds to metal really well. So just stick the tip in there, or you can, smear it on, whatever works for you. And then you're going to press that on, and then we are going to clamp to the wire. Nice and tight. And then once the Power Grab dries, it'll be stuck on there pretty good. Just want to get it clamped as much as you can so that. Alright. And then we do that 15 more times. So now that we have these all glued, these are going to take probably I'm in Arizona, so everything dries pretty quickly, but these are going to take a couple of hours to set completely. So I'm going to set these aside for now. I'm going to do this one at a time so that I don't mess them up. But yeah, in the end they should look like that. And we've got like just a little bit of a hook on the wire there. Not a lot. It's just enough to deter it from, like, if it snaps or the glue comes undone a little bit. It doesn't just drop the feather entirely. This feather's also going to be strung on, so once we get it strung, it's not going to go anywhere. Just the more secure it is, the better. Over-engineer everything. Alright, so now that that's done, what we're going to do is make our fan. And we want the first feather forward, and then every other feather to go behind it. So, yeah. Just make sure these are flipped the right way because these are directional, the top ones. And I have them upside down. These two are fine. So, the way this works is we need to create a little bar. I'm going to use this scrap. Be frugal. And basically what's going to happen is this is going to go through. We've got a little washer on either side that's going to, make sure that these are held on. But we also need to create a bar that comes above it that our elastic and our wristband basically is going to attach to. And that's not gonna, I guess if you wanted to be lazy about it, you could have this go through the middle, and then wrap up, and then, like, make a box, basically. You could do that. I like to do this method because it means that we can adjust things later way easier if need be. And it also makes it a little more modular, so if, like, one thing is wrong, you can fix it. If this whole piece breaks or becomes warped or bent, then you have to make a whole new piece and then disassemble the whole thing. And so I'm gonna basically just like this. I'm gonna make a little loop, and this loop is to go around, just like these, to go around our bolt. Ow. And then I want it to go straight up. And then I'm going to give it, you okay over there? I'm going to give it half an inch to 3/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to bend it at a 90 degree. And then it has to go over all of these, and pretty much you're going to the end of this bolt. So, easy way to do this is you can kind of measure, throw that on there, see where it's at, and then see that you need to make a bend in right about there to get it to come down at the right spot. So that's what we'll do. And make your second loop on the other side, and we can align these in a minute. Yeah. Snip this. Come on. Off it goes. Okay, so they're not quite aligned, so I'm going to get another pair of pliers. And we're just going to make sure that these are flat. You don't want them to be, like, as you can see, one is twisted a little bit, and that's the dangers of working with wire. But you can basically grab both ends and twist until both of them are flat and parallel to each other. You can kind of adjust your shape a little bit here. Make sure they're aligned. And there you go. So now we have this little bar. And what we're going to do is go through the one side, go through all of our feathers. I know I'm missing one in here. Hold on. And there. And I gave this just a little bit too much space, but the nice thing is this wire, it'll, basically sandwich in super easy. And so if you're a little off, it's not that big a deal. And then, whoop. So now they're all held on this little bar, and is my phone ringing?
Yeah.
Come on. So, yeah, now we have this little bar, and that is where eventually, for now, we're not dealing with that, but we're going to make basically a little bracelet, and that's going to attach underneath the wrist, and you're going to be able to hold this top feather and open and close your harpy wing. So next is stringing, but we can't, we can string the top, but we can't really do anything with our these guys until they're dry. So I'm going to go ahead and instead of stringing so that we can get one wing done all at once, I'm going to go ahead and finish the other side.
Okay, so as promised, I done goofed, and this is one of those parts that I did not record. So basically when you start your stringing, if you are starting on an articulating set, you are going to tie your first knot up on the tip of the frame and then start where that red line is. You're going to start stringing all of your feathers together in the knotting pattern I did record coming on up. But if you're doing a Harpy set, what you're going to do is you're going to have to bring your first knot is going to be on the first feather, and it's going to be 6 inches out to the front. So where you see the second layer of brown feathers is basically where that line is. It's about 2 inches inside of that line of feathers. So you're basically going to draw a line along there and then tie your string to each point of the wire along that line. The other thing to note on the articulating sets is that those first 2 feathers are not actually strung on. They are bolted to the frame very tight and held up with 2 separate bolts that make sure that they stay in line with the frame. Those 2 do not get strung. The first feather that you string is the 3rd feather down, and that's the one that's going to be under the most tension. So it has a tendency to be strung very tight. And please keep in mind that each and every single one of the feathers subsequent are under a certain amount of tension. The first 6 or so feathers are going to be under the greatest amount of tension, and you're definitely going to want to tug on those and make sure that you're getting your spacing right. And then all of the subsequent feathers, after probably the first 6, that tension starts to lower and you won't need to tug on it as much, and assume that those are going to be under gravity, but they're not going to be under a massive amount of tension. Again, even spacing is quite critical, so you're definitely going to want to work pretty hard on making sure that your feathers, while under gravity, are spaced correctly. Again, while you're stringing, you can tug on them and make sure that when you tug, they maintain even spacing, and their maximum distance is the maximum spacing you ever want them to be. You can also hold it up and make sure that when under gravity, the feathers below aren't pulling them too far apart.
to do for our Harpy wings is create our wristband, and we need to create, or rather we need to attach the band that is going to hold all of our clip feathers. I use a nice, no twist elastic for this. You can use, like I said, nylon or something else if you want, but like as you bend your arm, you might get some buckling, and the elastic helps to mitigate that a little bit. The other nice thing is what I like to do is when I create gloved sets, rather than, this is going to be a wrap set, so it's going to go straight onto this elastic, and then a wrap around is going to hold the elastic to the arm. But if you are making a sleeve or you have a glove, you can actually sew this in a seam to the glove or to the sleeve, and it creates a really nice sturdy connection for you to use to attach those clip feathers. So this is a little longer than I need, but we'll cut it off once we know what length we want. For right now, what we're going to do to slip through that little bar that we created, we're going to create some little loops in our wristband. This wristband is going to come pretty much straight off of the wrist once it comes around. It doesn't need to connect at the base. It just needs to have two loops that come off the top of the wrist. So a good way to measure it is to measure all the way around your wrist, and then it'll be shortened by creating these loops. So now that we have our wristband, what you want to do is make sure that the band holding up the feathers is on the back side of your wing. And remember, these feathers, the first feather faces forward, so we're looking right now at the back of this set of wings. And what I'm going to do, we actually have to take this apart again, which is fine. Putting it back together is not too hard. But I'm going to take this apart, and we're going to take off this piece just from the base, and what we're going to do is slip these loops through here. So that they're creating a bracelet and a loop. And then some of these feathers came off, so let's put those back on. Put that on. And now's the point where we can tighten down this nut and bolt so that they are finally secured. There's not much else we're going to do with them. Oops. So I've tightened this just so that it's biting into the nylon and kind of flush. You don't want to over tighten these because then these aren't going to move freely and hang. If you tighten them down too much, what ends up happening is these are all going to try and stick together. So you don't want them rattling around, but and in this case my bolt is exactly the right size. But if you're putting more feathers on your fan, or these are larger or whatever, and you need a longer bolt and you're tightening it down more, just remember to give it just a little bit of room so that it can swing around. So this is going to fit like this on the wrist and then come off here, and these are going to clip like so. Now, something to keep in mind is, like, if you put these too close together, they're going to splay, and if you put them too far apart, because you've already tied them where you want them, they're going to, the tips of the feathers are going to squeeze together. So you want to make sure that the wristband and this piece of elastic, you're placing them, you may have to adjust too. It's really easy with the clips, so not a big deal, but just make sure that these are, when this is in a straight line, these are laying flat. So, there we go. That looks pretty good. I think I want to separate these a little, or put these a little closer together so that the noses aren't pointing so close together. They're all kind of facing inward a little bit, and like all of them are facing about the same amount, but kind of want to change that angle, so I'm going to just adjust. And then you might, put them on and adjust some more. Super easy. Okay, so now we have our wrist joint. We have all this extra. Depending on what you're doing, you're going to want this strap to secure somewhere on your costume to hold this up. If you just have wraps, this will have a tendency to droop and droop below your arm. So gloves are super good, especially if you can get like a little feather sleeve over them that covers the whole top. You could do that. The feather sleeve would basically be the same. Watch the sleeve making tutorial for the articulating wings. It's pretty much the same principle. We're covering up this top. The difference here is the shape. I mean, we have a straight arm basically when this is open. So your pattern for your sleeve is actually, it's just going to come out because your hand's going to be out here, remember. So you want to cover your hand. You're going to come out to about here, and you're going to just make a curve and then a straight line. So same kind of idea on the tip where it's going to have like this curved shape, kind of like an oval at the top, only we're not going to have any stretch seams. We're just going to go straight across and cover up this top portion right here. And that's it. All you're trying to do is cover your arm, making a feather sleeve. Like an actual feather sleeve. This also, the same principle applies with the ties. If you want to create that feather sleeve, what you're going to do is you're going to have ties all along the edge to fish through so that it keeps the base closed, but doesn't really hinder too much the function of the pivoting of the feathers. So next, before we start masking any of this or hiding anything, we just need to put a teeny tiny dab on each of these knots. Theoretically, these should hold pretty well, but sometimes under tension and whatnot, they will slip, and that is the last thing that we want. We want them to stay super stable, and we want it to be a predictable look the entire time. So we're going to just go ahead, take our hot glue gun, and just go ahead with these ones that are overlapping. You're going to need to hold it open while the glue dries, otherwise you're going to glue the feathers together, which is not what you want, which takes a little bit of extra time, but we're not trying to glue, we're not only not trying to glue the two feathers together, we're not trying to glue the string to the feather necessarily. If the glue gets on the feather, it's fine, and they are glued together a little bit, that's fine. But really what we're just trying to do is make sure that that knot doesn't slip or open up. So we're just putting a dab of glue around the edges of that so that it has this frictional force holding it, the glue holding it together so that it's not slipping. And just a dab will do ya. Little tiny dab, especially on this set because it is because this set is pretty minimalistic and we are not hiding this with the knots with additional feathers, which is what I normally do. Being very careful to keep this very minimal so that we don't have these giant globs of glue showing. On larger sets, I'll do a larger glob of glue, especially when you have, or when you're using the paracord. These are going to be pretty big blobs, but again, once you're covering them up with feathers, you can either cover them up with something fluffy. That actually works really, really well because it kind of hides the string among other strings. So this is an ostrich feather. You can get ostrich drabs, for pretty cheap. And those ones, especially on the Harpy sets, work really, really well. The other, if you want a sleeker, less, Victoria's Secret look, you can go with turkey quills. They're a very, very streamlined feather, very stiff, so they're going to maintain their look the whole way. And this will help just hide that. It doesn't camouflage, as it were, the string as well, but it does, it just physically hides it and is a good choice all around. customer wants a little gold wrap to hold this up. But what we need to do is mask these little clips. And when you have, you know, ostrich or whatever, you can also do turkey marabou, whatever they're called, the fuzzies. Maximum fuzzification. You can actually throw up at the top and kind of splay them out so that they're masking this part. And then you can use the color of your choice. It's actually the same type of feather, marabou, whatever. Fuzz. You can use, you can get these in boas, and these actually work really well for at the top. And what you want to do so that you maintain your elasticity is you're going to give yourself a little bit of a loop, just a little one, so that you have some room to stretch. And you can tack these a little bit to the elastic, or you can do what I'm doing because I'm lazy, and this works great, is just using the alligator clip. Go ahead and throw the alligator clip this underneath that to hold it onto here and mask the alligator clip itself, and that kind of gives it a little bit of fuzz to hide everything, and that works really, really well. If you have these on a sleeve or whatever, it's not going to be an issue. You're just going to have the sleeve come over the top, and this can be on a glove or whatever. The other thing is you can just hold this.